Ah, there it is, my old room. And there I am, drinking hot cocoa, eating my favorite cookies, and wearing that amazing sweater that was never too popular in school. But no matter, Christmas was on its way. Lovely, glorious, beautiful Christmas. And that meant it was time to cram in as many holiday films as I could. Some men were Baptists, others were Catholics. I was a VHS man. The Snowman? Too sad. The Grinch? Not this year. A Christmas Story? Ah, it had been a while since I'd seen that.
Well, seeing I'm home alone this year, why not take a look at this classic? There's a lot of interesting behind the scenes trivia that I'm sure many of you aren't aware of. So, get comfortable, grab some hot chocolate and sugar cookies, because we're taking a deep dive into this beloved holiday film from concept all the way to its final picture. A Christmas Story is one of the most classic films to ever exist, with some channels even broadcasting the movie on repeat for 24 hours straight.
What did you say?
If you've somehow never seen the film, you've at least seen the merchandise walking through Target or any other store during the holiday season. The film is based on a semi-autobiographical collection of works by Gene Shepherd, who would often recount tales from his youth on the radio. Many segments from the movie came from his 1966 book, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. However, they also used stories from his 1983 book, A Fistful of Fig Newtons, along with some new ones that were never written. Sometime in 1968, director Bob Clark was living in Miami and was on his way to pick up a date. While driving, he turned the radio on and heard Shepherd telling the story of Flick's tongue on the radio. As he neared his destination, Clark was so immersed that he kept driving around so he could finish listening to the narration. As it turned out, Shepherd's story continued for 40 more minutes, which resulted with Clark picking up a very irate date. It was after this experience when Clark knew that one day he wanted to make a film based on Gene Shepherd's childhood. Years later, Clark broke into Hollywood with horror films like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, Death Dream, and Black Christmas. That's right, the same man who directed the sweet family film also directed one of the first holiday slasher flicks in horror history. In 1981, Clark directed the sex comedy Porky's, which was great financially but bombed with critics. After working on Porky's 2, Clark had nearly ruined his reputation and wanted to prove the studios that he still had what it takes to make a more classy film, like his 1980 comedy drama Tribute, which was nominated for many awards. Now was the perfect time for Clark to get started on his Gene Shepherd film. Clark worked with Gene Shepherd and his wife, Leigh Brown, to nail down the script for A Christmas Story. They put together many different stories from Shepherd's youth and connected them all together with the Red Ryder BB gun quest acting as the main through line for the film. For the part of the narrator, it was only appropriate that Shepherd would take on the role, so that wasn't something that even needed a second thought. The main objective was to find the perfect actor to play Ralphie. They auditioned over 8,000 young men for the main role. When Clark sat down to watch the audition tapes, the first one he saw was of a young kid named Peter Billingsley. He recognized Billingsley as the boy who hosted a show called Real People. Clark liked this kid, but felt it was too obvious of a choice, and of course, out of 8,000 auditions, he couldn't just pick the first one he saw. Clark moved on and saw the rest of the tapes, but couldn't stop picturing Billingsley as Ralphie. After 2.5 months, Clark decided to screw it and hired the young star to play the main character. At this point, Billingsley thought he wasn't going to get the part, so it must have been a surprise for him when he received a call asking him to fly down to Toronto for group auditions. Clark also asked him if he wanted to watch the new film he had just done, which, funny enough, was Porky's 2. In Toronto, Clark brought in many child actors to do screen tests and figure out which ones had the right type of chemistry with each other. This is when they cast R.D. Robb to play Schwartz and Scott Schwartz to play Flick. For the role of the two bullies, they held many auditions. Zach Ward originally went in reading for the sidekick, who was named Scott Farkas. Yana Anaya was set to play the main bully named Grover Dill. The two actors met Bob Clark for the first time on set to film their scenes. When Clark saw the two young men, he realized there was a drastic height difference, so he asked them to simply switch their lines on the spot, and that's how Scott Farkas became the main bully. Ralphie's mother was played by Melinda Dillon. Clark saw her in Spielberg's sci-fi epic, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and she became the obvious choice for Mrs. Parker. To star alongside her, Clark originally wanted Jack Nicholson to play the old man Parker. Clark even met with Nicholson after directing Porky's because MGM wanted the two to make a film called Turn Left or Die. That movie was never made, but MGM did send Nicholson the script to A Christmas Story, which, according to the studio, he loved. The reason why Nicholson wasn't cast was because the studio never told Clark about the positive reception the script had received from him, so Clark went on to hire Darren McGavin, who had already been in multiple Broadway shows and films. Clark believed that the studio didn't tell him because they didn't want to pay Nicholson's fee since it was a low-budget film. This ended up acting as a blessing in disguise since Clark felt that McGavin's performance perfectly captured that fatherly figure role. Also, if Nicholson did the role, it would have been soon after starring in another family film that also took place in the winter.
Here's Johnny!
Ralphie's little brother, Randy, is played by Ian Petrella, who was cast the day before production started while some of the actors were rehearsing at Bob Clark's house in New Bedford. There were around 40 to 48 days of production. For a film this scale, principal photography took longer due to the fact that nearly every scene included kids, and because of SAG regulations, the children had a lot more restrictions, one of them being that they couldn't work any more than 6 to 8 hours depending on their exact age. The film was shot in Cleveland, Ohio and Toronto, Canada. Many of the indoor scenes were filmed in Toronto, while the exteriors were filmed in Cleveland. This is where the script supervisor came in handy because sometimes a scene would switch back and forth between the different countries. Thankfully for the filmmakers, Cleveland turned out to be a perfect location since they found a great house and were able to get access to the department store. And because the city of Cleveland loves Christmas, it made it easier for them to shoot the parade scene since they left many of their decorations up even though it was early January. The mall scene proved to be one of the more difficult scenes to shoot. First of all, production designer Ruben Fried needed a location that hadn't been altered by having their ceilings drop and air conditioning installed since they needed that space to build the Santa Mountain slide. They filmed at Higbee's department store, who would only let them film when the mall was closed. This means they had to quickly go in, set up the lights and decorations, film everything they needed, then tear everything down before the mall opened up in the morning. On bigger Hollywood productions, they could have just made a big set, but the budget didn't allow the filmmakers that luxury. In an interview Fried did with the Academy, he said that he didn't sleep for 3 days straight trying to plan out the parade, mall sequence, and a Flash Gordon space set. You may not remember seeing the latter one, and that's because it ended up being a deleted scene from the movie. Originally, there was supposed to be a fantasy where Ralphie saved Flash Gordon, who was pinned down behind the moon rock by Ming the Merciless. It was this scene where Peter Billingsley remembers having to wear an embarrassing outfit designed by costume designer Mary E. McLeod, who had previously only done Porky's 1 and 2. Billingsley described the outfit as a teeny shiny silver-like panties. Clark deleted the scene because it didn't fit in as well as he hoped, and Billingsley thinks that part of the reason was because he was so self-conscious that Clark could probably tell it affected his performance. Unfortunately, the film reel is lost, with the only surviving evidence being a picture of Ralphie with Flash Gordon. It's sad to hear this fantasy is lost since a good chunk of the budget went to that sequence. There were also 2 daydreams that didn't even make it to the production schedule. One where Miss Shields shows up to Ralphie's home to tell the parents how incredible of a kid he is and why he deserves a BB gun. Then there was another sequence with Santa Claus that took place on the roof. Costume designer Mary McLeod had to go to libraries and figure out what type of clothes they would wear during the film's time period. As she recounts in an interview, one time Bob Clark came to her with an idea of what Ralphie should wear the day before they shot that scene, so she had to quickly put something together. Massive respect for all the costume designers out there who've lost hours of sleep for those last-minute creations. According to director Bob Clark, the film takes place sometime in the late 30s, early 40s, towards the beginning of World War II, with Indiana being the main setting since Shepard was raised in the city of Hammond. Production designer Ruben Fried credits set director Mark Freeborn as the heart and soul for the texture and authenticity of of the 1940s style home. While Freed worked with Clark to plan out where everything would go, Freeburn and his crew would set out to collect various props from the 40s. Then Reuben Freed would simply come in and pick out which decorations they would use. According to Freed, one of the hardest props to find was the old-timey radio that Ralphie uses to listen to Little Orphan Annie, which, by the way, was a real show that aired from 1931 to 1942. The Decoded Rings were also a popular thing. Like Ralphie, you could receive one in the mail, then use that to decode a secret message that the radio host would give you. These messages normally led previews for the next episode of the show and sometimes even lousy advertisements.
Son of a bitch.
Another issue that Freed and Clark encountered was the same problem every single filmmaker experiences: the goddamn weather. Snow would start to melt, so the crew members had to either make fake snow using detergent, or they'd have to spray down water the night before shooting so it could freeze and turn to ice. That's how they achieve this white Christmas shot when Ralphie looks out the window. Peter Billingsley has often commented on the refreshing nature of being on set for A Christmas Story. Previously, he had done Paternity with Burt Reynolds and Honky Tonk Freeway, which were big budget films compared to Clark's film. However, there was a distinction that Billingsley noticed, and that was the amount of passion Bob Clark and Gene Shepard were putting into the film, which makes sense since they had been talking about making this movie for 12 years at that point. Clark would arrive on set prepared with note cards that included the framing for each shot, along with notes to himself on what he wanted for the performances. Because 80s, they didn't have a video village like you normally see today, where a director can sit behind a live monitor. Instead, Clark would stand right next to the camera and see what was being filmed. This meant that he would often be standing right in front of the actors. In fact, he read all the narration parts to Billingsley when they filmed so that he had something to react to. And because Ralphie's acting relied mostly on facial expressions, Clark would go off script and tell Billingsley what Ralphie was feeling at the moment. Billingsley found this to be very useful for his performance since he was able to pretty much hear his character's subconscious. Another major aspect that helped his performance was the attention to detail that the filmmakers put into the set, especially with a small budget. Billingsley would often roam around his character's room and find all sorts of items from the 30s and 40s, so it was no issue escaping into that other world.
But the attention to detail was amazing. I remember even in the kids' rooms, all the toys were old. There was nothing faked. Everything was so well done. It was very easy to get into the mindset of it.
Principal photography for A Christmas Story wrapped on late March of 1983. The film was released to theaters worldwide 8 months later on November 18th, the weekend before Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, it was considered a sleeper film, barely making $2 million on its opening weekend. Technically, it made its money back, grossing $19.3 million during its initial run, but Bob Clark was still disappointed with the results. The low box office numbers could have likely been a result from the studio pulling the film out from most theaters for the last 3 weekends leading up to Christmas. The movie only played for 4 weeks, and 2 of those weeks were considered the weakest of the year for movie theaters. Had they played the film during the main Christmas season, Clark strongly believes they would have raised the box office result up to $40 million. In a way, reading about all these sleeper films is quite comforting because if I'm ever lucky enough to release my own movies, I know it's not the end of the world if they don't get immediate attention. In fact, the same can be said about these videos. Let's go ahead and take a look at this VHS. I really dig the artwork here. I'm glad they used the official movie poster rather than just taking screenshots of the film and putting it all together. You know, that reminds me actually of Wandering Inside Hollywood Video. I never actually saw this one, but I saw the VHS for Muppets Christmas Carol and The Grinch, both the original and live action remake. That was always nice, just walking around, trying to decide what you're gonna watch that evening while other movies played in the background. But for some reason, I can't think of a specific video store memory right now. But maybe our friend can. Hey Zach, how's it going?
Hey Renee. Well, here's one for you. I used to go to a video store called 2020, and they got my membership wrong. So I went up to the counter and I was getting my membership done, and they passed it back to me. Now my name is Zach Ward, and instead they wrote Jack Hard, which to me seemed like some type of James Bond porno actor. And I was like, no, I want to keep this, please. This is hilarious. That was one of my favorite moments when Zach Ward became Jack Hard. 00 Heaven? I don't know. Anyways, there's my favorite video store memory.
Well, thank you, sir, for that awesome story. I'm glad they at least mixed your name up with something cool sounding. If it were me, I'm sure they'd just misspell my name. But with that covered, let's go ahead and watch the film, talk about its story structure, and just take a look at some extra behind-the-scenes facts. The movie opens with a shot of Ralphie's childhood home, introducing us to his ordinary world along with a narration from Gene Shepard himself. In the shooting script, there was originally a longer narration that took us through different locations in northern Indiana. The exterior of Higbee's is then shown as the 6th place we visit. There is also a longer opening sequence with Snow White and Santa, but I don't really know what that's all about. Back to the film, we see Ralphie, his little brother Randy, and his friends look into the display window of a store. The call to adventure is set when Ralphie spots his most wanted Christmas present ever.
The holy grail of Christmas gifts, the Red Ryder 200-shot range model air rifle.
Like any kid has done, Ralphie tries to send subtle hints about the BB gun, and so he hides a Red Ryder sales pitch inside his mother's magazine. When asked what he wants for Christmas, Ralphie quickly lets his mother know, but receives a devastating response that acts as the refusal of the call.
No. Shoot your eye out.
Oh no, it was the classic mother BB gun block.
By the way, the actual Red Ryder did not have a compass and sundial in the stock. However, another model called the Daisy Buck Jones did have those features. They added a compass and sundial from the prop Red Ryder gun on the opposite side of the stock since Peter Billingsley is left-handed. Anyways, we're led to our first daydream by Ralphie where he imagines how much a Red Ryder could change his life, to the point where he'd be able to shoot away a bunch of hamburglers. Being the early 80s, they didn't have access to digital effects, so the only way to make it look like Ralphie shot the burglar was to essentially tape a small spark and light it up. While talking with Vince Vaughn, Jon Favreau, and Justin Long, Peter Billingsley revealed that they actually gave him Red Man leaf tobacco for this scene and claimed to have started sweating profusely along with feeling dizzy, having his lips burn, and even vomiting. As Jon Favreau states, nowadays they just use black licorice even for adults, so that kinda sucks for Billingsley. Vaughn, Favreau, and Billingsley are in fact good friends in real life and have worked on multiple films together like Elf, Spider-Man Far From Home, Iron Man, and other such projects. But now we're getting a little sidetracked. Funny enough, even as a kid, Peter Billingsley found this in the blind scene to be a drastic change in tone, but praises them for how well they worked in the film. His father, referred to as the old man, goes down to the basement and starts yelling a storm of curses when he battles the house furnace. We then get this great scene with Randy that I'm sure many can relate to. In real life, Randy didn't actually have that many layers of clothing on. It was essentially a suit he could quickly take off. For his arms, they cut out pieces of upholstery foam and duct taped it underneath the arms, and that's how they were able to achieve this effect. The scene follows up with Ralphie and his little brother meeting up with Flick and Shorts to walk to school, which I guess would be considered meeting the mentor on the hero's journey.
Hey, listen, smartass.
In 1983, audiences weren't used to hearing young children swear in family films and were shocked when they heard Shorts say this line. This was released a year after E.T., but A Christmas Story was in theaters before films like The Goonies, Big, and Stand By Me, which all had children cursing. However, it was important for the writers to capture that natural energy of kids swearing behind the adult's back. During recess, Flick and Shorts argue about the results on what would happen if you stuck your tongue on a frozen flagpole. In a raging battle, Shorts unleashes the dreaded triple dog dare. With no other choice, Flick sticks his tongue to the flagpole.
Duck, 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 duck,
To make this effect look as painful and realistic as possible, the filmmakers built a fake light pole that had a tiny hole which would suck air in. It would actually suck enough air in to get your tongue fairly stuck, but it was able to turn off and it wasn't painful. In fact, as a joke, they left Scott Shorts, the actor who played Flick, stuck and pretended to leave before turning off the tiny vacuum. In class, Miss Shields asks the room about Flick's whereabouts, then quickly notices him screaming outside. The fire department shows up and gets Flick back to class. The teacher gives a brief speech about guilt, but like the narrator says,
But kids know better. We knew darn well it was always better not to get caught.
Interesting enough, on the commentary, Peter Billingsley says that the kids in the cast had a crush on Teddy Moore, who played Miss Shield. The students are assigned a new assignment to write about what they want for Christmas. Ralphie sees this as the perfect opportunity to cross the first threshold and plead his case in hopes that his adult authority will convince his parents. On the way home from school, the boys are confronted by the local bully named Scut Farkas and his sidekick Grover Dill. With the enemy set up, the kids run away, but unfortunately, Schwartz is left behind as he's subjected to a most bogus hammerlock. Probably his karma for daring Flick to stick his tongue on the flagpole. Let me just add that all these kids were, and from what it seems, are good friends in real life. They've all recounted stories of them hanging out on set and even at their hotels, where they spend a lot of time in hotel rooms doing mischievous things like throwing water balloons out the balcony, throwing toilet paper to passing buses, or making fake wake-up calls. In the next scene, we witness Ralphie in the middle of writing his essay before his old man comes home exclaiming he's won a mysterious prize. Later that night, we get this great scene where a big crate shows up to his house.
Ah, fragile. It must be Italian.
Well, I think that says fragile, honey.
Oh, yeah.
This was actually a joke that Bob Clark came up with on the spot while they were gearing up to film this shot. According to the commentary, this is Peter Billingsley's favorite scene of the film. Out from the crate, Mr. Parker pulls out what would end up being the most memorable prop from the film, a leg lamp. Production designer Ruben Fried had never heard of a leg lamp before, so he went to Gene Shepard and asked him what that was, only to hear back,
"A lamp with a leg on it?"
Also, Peter Billingsley actually didn't know what was in the box, so his reaction here is a genuine one. The old man immediately falls in love with the lamp and showcases it through their front window. When he goes outside to get a view of it from the street, director Bob Clark makes his cameo as one of the neighbors who are in awe by the lamp. And from my understanding, the jacket that Clark is wearing here didn't exist in the early 40s, so it's possible this character may be a time traveler. Embarrassed by her husband, Mrs. Parker distracts Ralphie and Randy by reminding them of their favorite radio show, Little Orphan Annie. The following day at school, Ralphie turns in his homework and daydreams about his paper receiving the ultimate grade. Billingsley has stated that the fantasy sequences were always fun to film because it gave the actors a chance to just overreact and have fun, a complete 180 from Clark's common direction to underplay it. Later that night, the Parker family go out to pick out a nice Christmas tree. On their way home, they get a flat tire, which takes us to one of the most memorable scenes for me as a child. As Ralphie is helping his father, he accidentally drops all the wheel nuts, causing him to blurt out George Carlin's third word in his 7 dirty words.
Oh, fudge.
Only I didn't say fudge. I said the word.
A great little thing they did to shoot this is they did a take where Ralphie says fudge. Then they did a take where he says the actual F word. This is the take they likely used. While editing, they dubbed over the F word with audio of him saying fudge and zoomed in before you saw him mouth the K sound. Bob Clark included this scene as a reminder to people that the word existed in the 30s, since many assume it didn't. In fact, the word can be attested as far back as 1475. We smash cut to Ralphie with Lifebuoy soap in his mouth. When asked how he found out, Ralphie didn't want to snitch his father out, so he immediately blames on the innocent Schwartz, who we hear get a brutal beating from his mom.
He heard it from your son.
In real life, Peter Billingsley's mother had the same soap punishment for him. On set, Billingsley was simply chewing on a fake bar of soap made of wax, which, according to him, was nice to chew on. The writers purposely made it Lifebuoy soap because it was a very popular brand at the time that had an awful taste to it. It was also the soap that many parents would put in their kids' mouths as punishment. The soap was completely phased out of the American market by 2006. In fact, this soap is banned in places like Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and other European countries because of its harshness. I believe now if it's sold, it's mostly used to clean animals. But okay, let's move on. We've cleaned that bit of trivia off our plate. Ralphie cries himself to sleep and daydreams about getting soap poisoning, which leaves him blind, causing his parents to regret ever punishing him.
Yes, soap poisoning.
Billingsley has commented that this scene was difficult to shoot because he didn't have his prescripted specs, but he had to try and see through tiny pinpricks, so he would often run into furniture while wearing these glasses. Also, let's take a second and appreciate the silliness of the film. The studio was very gracious with Bob Clark and pretty much let him switch stuff up, something not many filmmakers may get the chance to do. He had the freedom to do whatever he wanted to do, and it really shows. The next morning, the kids are once again chased by the bullies. In class, Ralphie bribes his teacher with a giant gift basket. After once again running home from the bullies, Ralphie sees his package from little orphan Annie has arrived. With his new decoders, he spends the night carefully writing down the encrypted message from the radio. In an intense moment where he's pressured to leave the bathroom, Ralphie finds out the message he's been waiting weeks to uncover.
Be sure to drink your Ovaltine. Ovaltine?
There's a match cut that takes us right into the next scene. Randy runs in and sits down, then it immediately cuts to some nasty looking sauce. According to Bob Clark, this was completely unintentional. A nasty little accident, as some would say. Later that evening, the old man rushes back to the basement to fight the furnace. However, after a loud crash is heard, Mr. Parker rushes up to the living room and finds his wife holding his broken lamp. Unfortunately, not even glue could save his precious prize.
Later that night, alone in the backyard, he buried it next to the garage. Now, I could never be sure, but I thought that I heard the sound of taps being played, gently.
The next morning, the kids run away from Scott and Grover, leaving Flick alone to get hurt. In class, Ralphie is given back his essay and is distraught when he finds out he's received a C+.
Oh no! You'll shoot your eye out?
In the first draft of the script, Gene Shepard originally wrote the phrase, "You'll shoot your eye out," once, but Bob Clark made every character Ralphie asked say it to further emphasize that rejection. On his way home from school, Ralphie is confronted by Scott Farkas and his little goon. Already feeling upset from his grade, Ralphie reaches his ordeal and snaps, unleashing a fiery fury against Farkas. To my surprise, the words that Ralphie mutters while he beats up Farkas was actually scripted.
You Thornton over them nipple bang gunk stinking piss!
Gene Shepard gave note cards to Ralphie on set, which had words he had to memorize.
No, Gene would write. Gene, from me, wrote this when I beat up the bully. He specifically wrote.
Yes.
And I remember the beginning. It's still. There's a couple things in this movie that will not get out of my head. It was Cradden Rat Stinkin' Hot Poffensnogger.
That's it.
And he wrote that out, and he wrote 3 cards and forced me to memorize it all.
I told him no
He
fake.
said, don't just try to get through it.
Also, one of these girls in the background, I'm not sure which one, grew up and had a baby that would later appear in Baby Geniuses 2, another film which Bob Clark directed. Very random, but I found that so interesting. Last thing regarding this scene, even though Zach Ward was the one who played the yellow-eyed bully, in real life he was nothing like his character. In fact, he's often stated in interviews that he would get bullied in school for being named Zach, which wasn't a common name at the time. Other reasons he's mentioned was for being a redhead with no father, having a low income, and owning a poodle named Tinkerbell. A Christmas Story would turn out to be his first feature film, which he shot when he was 13. Even though he was the same age as the other kids, he just happened to be taller. In fact, the actor who played Flick, Scott Schwartz, was 15, but happened to be quite shorter than Ward, so I'm sure many of you didn't notice. With this specific scene, Ward fell onto a mat that was hidden underneath the snow, and even though he wasn't actually getting slapped, he was getting hit by the idiot strings that were attached to the gloves. Mrs. Parker shows up and takes Ralphie home. As he waits for his father to return and find out, we see Randy hiding in the kitchen cabinet, crying because he thinks the old man is going to kill Ralphie. During dinner, Ralphie is expecting the worst, but his mom plays down the event to Mr. Parker so Ralphie doesn't get in trouble. While trying to go to sleep that night, Ralphie thinks of his plan C to seize the sword and get the BB gun of his dreams.
Of course, Santa, the big man, the head honcho, the connection. My mother had slipped up this time.
The next scene shows the Parker family at a Christmas Eve parade. During production, they filmed the Disney characters before they even had the rights to use them. Their plan was to simply cut it out if Disney didn't want them in the film, but lucky for them, they were fine with it since they just saw it as extra promotion and the characters were depicted in the same way they would be used in real life. This mall sequence also included many Wizard of Oz references because Clark knew MGM would be okay with it since they also held the rights to those characters. Inside the mall, Ralphie thinks the line to Santa is short but is immediately schooled when he finds out there's a line to get in line. That man right there is actually Gene Shepard in his short cameo.
Just where do you think you're going?
Going up to see Santa.
The line ends here. It begins there.
At the back of the line, Ralphie encounters the funniest kid in the film, who in real life genuinely creeped out Peter Billingsley.
I like the Wizard of Oz.
Bob Clark saw the kid just smiling and found it hilarious, so he added him into the film. When it comes to meeting Santa, Randy goes first and immediately starts crying. This was a genuine reaction coming from Randy's actor, Ian Petrella, who is terrified to go down the slide according to Clark and Billingsley. Now it's time for Ralphie to meet the scariest Santa of 1983. This Santa was played by Jeff Gillen, who had grown up in Florida with Bob Clark. He does appear in an earlier Clark film called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. Ralphie freezes up and agrees to wanting a football. This acts as the road back because our protagonist has made it to the great Santa Claus. Unfortunately, it wasn't what he expected. When he realizes his mistake, Ralphie climbs back up the slide and asks for what he actually wants.
No, I want an official red undercover knife and 200 jet regimental rifle.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
This is probably the funniest scene for me. A lot of jokes work really well in sets of 3, and this is a great example of that. We first hear the mom say it, then the teacher, and finally, Santa acting as the nail on the coffin. This also acts as our hero's resurrection because after all that build-up, Ralphie confronts his final test and fails to plead his case to the last man who could help him. This close-up shot of Ralphie climbing up the slide was also a reshoot they filmed later on. If you notice, there aren't even people in the background in what's supposed to be a busy mall setting. Some proof that movies having reshoots isn't a bad thing at all. In fact, I guarantee nearly all movies do it because there's just some things that don't work the first time or you just simply miss it. At home, the Parkers set up the Christmas tree before blowing out the fuse. Ralphie wakes up to find a beautiful white Christmas. The two boys quickly rush downstairs to open their presents, which is where we get the iconic scene with the rabbit onesie. As embarrassed Billingsley felt on set with this, he did end up keeping the onesie, cowboy outfit, and the Red Ryder once production wrapped up. After opening all the presents, the old man surprises Ralphie with his dream gift, the official Red Ryder BB gun. This acts as the return with the elixir since Ralphie finally gets the gift he's been wanting throughout the entire film. As Mrs. Parker prepares for their turkey dinner, Ralphie goes outside to live out his fantasy. Unfortunately for him, the very first shot he takes results in him shooting his eye out.
Oh my God, I shot my eye out.
He tries to play it cool so his parents don't notice, but accidentally steps on his glasses. Having to think on his feet, he makes up a fake icicle story to save his BB gun. Real quick, this was shot in Cleveland, this is Toronto. Cleveland, isn't editing wonderful? Mrs. Parker brings Ralphie inside and washes his face off. While Mrs. Parker helps Ralphie, the Bumpus' street bloodhounds sneak their way inside the house and cause a major ruckus, resulting in their Christmas dinner getting ruined. In real life, Bob Clark has said that the hounds were actually very difficult to work with, so when the studio wanted them in the sequel, Clark was very hesitant after his experience with them on the first film. The old man once again chases the dogs out and takes a pause before announcing his plan B. The Parkers go out to eat at a Chinese restaurant where the waiters attempt to sing Christmas carols before the main course is brought out. In the film's commentary, Bob Clark points out the political correctness of having the waiters sing the Christmas carols.
We had to stop and think of the political correctness of it. We talked it over with them and they said, don't be silly, we just listen. No, we don't do the L's.
We'll actually try.
Yeah.
The proof was there.
Try again. Deck the hall with boughs of glory. Ra 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 ra. Stop. Sing something else.
Also, fun little Easter egg, the Chinese restaurant was previously a bowling alley. That's why it's called Bo Ling, and you can still see a bowling sign there, it's just missing a W. This entire restaurant scene was done in one take on the first try. They did another one for safety, but they ended up using the first take that they filmed because the actors legitimately didn't know the butcher would cut the duck's head off right in front of them. The film wraps up on Christmas night. Mr. and Mrs. Parker turn off all the lights and sit in front of the window watching snowfall. Meanwhile, in his new world, we see Ralphie lay asleep in bed with his hands wrapped around his precious Red Ryder. This is also the first time where we cut to a shot of Ralphie in bed, and he's actually asleep. With that sweet ending covered, now it's time to take a look at the film's structure through our story wheel. The first one is location-based. This is in the beginning of the film when Ralphie's in the town square and sees the Red Ryder BB gun. We come back to that location later in the film when Ralphie decides to ask the main man himself, Santa, for the Red Ryder. Now for the daydream scenes. This is when Ralphie pictures himself stopping the burglars. Here's when he imagines his teacher giving him the perfect grade for his homework assignment. This is when he fantasizes his parents apologizing for giving him soap poisoning that caused him to go blind. And finally, this is when he finds out he got a C+ and daydreams his teacher and mother teasing him. Next up is the times the old furnace has played into the story somehow. We're introduced to this early on when we meet the old man. Later, Ralphie says the F word, which he claims he learned from his dad's curse storm while he was fighting with the furnace. Finally, Mr. Parker's downstairs yelling at the furnace when he hears his precious lamp break. Speaking of the old man, this is when he plugs the lamp into a dangerously packed outlet. Then later in the film, we see them plug the tree in, causing the house to lose its power. Overall, Scut Farkus and Grover Hill pick on each kid at different times. We first see them put Shorts in a hammerlock. Later on, we see Flick get hurt by them, and finally, after finding out he got a low grade on his assignment, Ralphie is teased by Scut Farkus. This leads to one of the kids finally taking down the bully and scaring off his goon. Next up is the setup to Little Orphan Annie. We're first introduced to this plot when Ralphie runs home and doesn't find his Little Orphan Annie decoder in the mail. Later, the mom distracts Ralphie and Randy away from the glow of electric sex gleaming in the window by reminding them of their Little Orphan Annie radio show. Finally, Ralphie receives his decoder in the mail and finds out the encrypted message to be a crummy advertisement. This is all the times the Bumpus's hounds annoy the old man. We first see them here when Mr. Parker comes home and struggles to enter the house. Right before the end of Act 2, we see the hounds do the same thing when the father is trying to enter his home. And finally, we get the payoff when the hounds enter the house and completely ruin the Christmas dinner the old man was drooling over. Speaking of Mr. Parker, this is when he receives a mysterious prize in the mail and finds out it's a leg lamp, which he immediately falls in love with. Unfortunately for him, this is when it's suggested Mrs. Parker broke the lamp. The old man attempts to reglue it, but fails. And now for the one I was most curious about. This is when Ralphie's mother initially rejects his Red Ryder desire.
Shoot your eye out.
Oh no, it was the classic mother BB gun block.
This is when he receives a C+ and gets the same rejection from his teacher.
Oh no. You'll shoot your eye out?
Hoping to still get it, this is when he asks Santa Claus but gets the same answer.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
Finally, this is when his father gives him the BB gun.
I had one when I was 8 years old.
But Ralphie immediately does what he's been warned throughout the entire film.
Oh my god, I shot my eye out!
Finally, the film opens with a daytime exterior shot of the Parker house, and it ends with a nighttime exterior of the same home. Some pretty good setups and payoffs here. If there's any more I'm sure I missed, please leave them in the comment section so we can all learn from this holiday film. Like I mentioned earlier, A Christmas Story turned out to be a sleeper film, but Roger Ebert gave the film 4 out of 4 stars and added it to his list of great movies. It wasn't until the movie was released on VHS in 1986 when the film started gaining more and more popularity. Steven Spielberg loved the film and expressed interest in meeting Shepard while helping producers find a narrating voice for a little show called The Wonder Years. Spielberg had lunch with Shepard, then called Bob Clark asking how he was able to get along with that guy, to which Clark completely understood why he was being asked that. On set, Shepard would often be invasive to the point where Clark would send him home.
One of yours is a bitter story. They first auditioned Shepard to do that. I introduced him to Spielberg. Steven was a big fan of Christmas Story, and he wanted to meet Shepard. So he had lunch with him and with his wife. And he called me and he said, Bob, how'd you get along with this guy? I said, I know exactly what you're talking about, Stephen, but Gene and I were together on this venture for 10 years before,
In 1994, Bob Clark directed My Summer Story, often referred to as It Runs in the Family, even though Clark dislikes that title. The same trio of writers wrote the screenplay, Gene Shepard narrated it, and the only returning cast member was Teddy Moore as Miss Shields. However, the film failed financially and received very mixed reviews. It currently holds a 46% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Despite the unsuccessful sequel, A Christmas Story is considered one of the most beloved holiday films ever made, to the point where some networks play the film on repeat for 24 hours. It was even shocking to Clark when he found out that at one point, 38.4 million different households tuned in sometime during the marathon. Clearly, along with movies like Elf and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, it has a major fan following. Like, seriously, have you seen how much they've milked this franchise? After the film, Bob Clark continued directing up until his tragic death in 2007 due to a head-on car collision that killed him and his 22-year-old son. Gene Shepard went on to narrate the sequel and appear in a few Sesame Street episodes before passing away in 1999 at the age of 78. Peter Billingsley later appeared in The Wonder Years. Nowadays, he works as a film producer but has made small appearances in Elf, Iron Man, and Spider-Man Far From Home, likely since his good friend Jon Favreau was involved in those films. Darren McGavin went on to play Billy Madison's father and appeared in Raw Deal starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Melinda Dillon, who played Mrs. Parker, went on to play Nancy in Harry and the Hendersons and Rose Gator in Magnolia. Zach Ward, who played Scott Farkus, went on to appear in many films and TV like Almost Famous, CSI, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and Freddy vs. Jason. R.D. Robb, who played Shorts, later played Roy in the 1996 film Matilda and has recently made many appearances on The Goldbergs. Scott Shorts, who played Flick, went on to do films like Kidco, A Time to Live, and Raiders of the Living Dead. Then he entered into the adult film industry for a while, before leaving in 2000 to work in other fields. A Christmas Story has undoubtedly brought much needed joy to millions of people since its original release. Before making this video, I hadn't seen the movie for quite a few years and was wondering why it became so popular. Is the film really that good that it deserves to play on a network for 24 hours straight? Why do so many people resonate with it? Well, there's other popular films like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and Elf that get just as much attention as this movie, but what differentiates A Christmas Story from the other two is its lead character. We're not following any adults here. The entire story takes place through the eyes of a young child. When I watch this film, I get an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. Not just because I watched this at a young age, but because it reminds me of what it was like being a kid. The daydreams Ralphie has is something I'm sure many people can relate to. We've all thought about getting the best grade in class and being praised by the teacher. We've all at one point or another tried to run away from home or have wished our parents to come back apologizing after getting in trouble. We've all experienced that dread that comes when you know you did something wrong and you just wait in your room waiting for your punishment. I don't think this movie is just about Christmas. It's about nostalgia and revisiting that feeling where your biggest objective in life was to get a $40 BB gun. It's reminiscing back to a time where you lived with your mom and dad. Maybe they weren't the most affectionate, but they showed they cared through small gestures like covering for you or going through the trouble of buying you a toy you've desperately wanted. Ralphie's old man seems fairly distant from him, but at the end of the story, the only adult figure that Ralphie didn't ask was the one who ended up buying him that Red Ryder. There's so many small little things that every family can relate to, whether it's having multiple plugs connected to one socket or having your mom dress you up in too many layers right before school, or even just sitting in front of them as you opened your presents. Watching this for the first time as an adult, the film reminded me that, as cheesy as it sounds, Christmas wasn't necessarily about the presents themselves, but the build-up to the day you got to open them. I can't remember every Christmas gift I've ever received, but I remember anxiously waiting for winter vacation vacation to start, going to school in pajamas and having Polar Express Day, the holiday-themed assignments leading up to the last class day of the year. I remember going to malls with my mom and dad, then seeing Santa in the distance waving at me. I remember the smell of dinner being made. I remember watching movies like this one in the living room while the Christmas lights from outside lit just enough for me to see the trees swaying in the cold breeze. I think the moment that perfectly captures the spirit of the holiday is this scene when Mr. and Mrs. Parker turn off all the lights and just look out at the falling snow while their kids lay peacefully asleep. You can tune into any single scene of this film and completely understand what's going on. I think that's the reason why networks play it on repeat so often. It's truly a slice of life film that takes us back to a sweet innocent time from our youth. And that's A Christmas Story. This was a lot of fun to revisit, so I hope you gained something out of this video. Until next time, have a happy holidays and don't forget to be kind to others and keep watching movies.
That evening, after wrapping up the video, I gazed off into the night sky, thinking about the upcoming year and all the possibilities it had. Gradually, I drifted to sleep, rewinding all kinds of tapes and talking about so many great films as I slowly dissolved into nothingness.